Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Canyon. Welcome back to another installment of the Breakdowns series. Will the Breakdown series ever end? Probably. Let's be fair. Probably not. They're easy to make, and we never appear to stop building these. Today, we jump all the way back to that gentleman who may be finished and may not be any closer to being finished than he's ever been. Hailing all the way back from It Came From the Workbench, Volume 2, our good friend Blue Sky High, who wears the body of an MST CFXW and ends his list of parts specific to the MST CFXW at the JP1 from the MST CFXW. I wish that I had the MST axles here to show you what the original axles looked like. Basically, think of the Element portal axles in that the CFXW in its stock configuration has no front nor rear axle. It just has the same axle twice. And for whatever reason, in the divine wisdom of MST, they didn't go with the 830 gear in the axle for the 3.75 reduction. They had about 2.6 to 1 reduction in the axle, and then used portals that had next to no reduction in the portals. They were like 1.2 to 1 portal reduction. So you had a vehicle with basically no gear reduction, but it comes out of the box fitted with an axle, a rear axle, that simply with the addition of a servo mount and a servo, you have now made a four-wheel steer vehicle. So Blue Sky High was my first foray into building a four-wheel steer vehicle, you can see. And what happened over the intervening years is that I think I have a perception that I've learned some things about four-wheel steer, about what four-wheel steer likes and what four-wheel steer doesn't like. First of all, let's begin here with this. These are the MST rails, which not unlike the axles, it's just the same rail twice. I can't think of any other instances where a rail is just fully mirrored, where there's no difference between the right-hand rail and the left-hand rail. But there we are. So I began by chasing down shock mounting positions, just making bolt-on. This is where the body mount used to be bolted on. We'd bolt on towers. I'd made towers front and rear. That guy would have gone about there to get us some little bit of lay down on the shocks as the shocks come completely vertical. We went through that, and then we built the first tower to the first rails to affix other towers to. We basically just straight cloned it, but we tried dropping the skid down, LCG it a little bit, put a little bit of an angle on it, and then we went much further into both dropping the skid. A first run like this, you'll see all the pen marks after it was done. The first run tends to have all of the mistakes, like where do the holes get moved to, what holes get omitted, what holes aren't done in the next iteration of the chassis. I want to say that the version that he's fitted with currently is the fourth, it might be the fifth, I think it's the fourth iteration of his chassis. So we took from what we learned with the others, and we went with this guy. It's a little bit different front and rear shock angle. And as mentioned, and this is as relevant as anything else that we will discuss, there are no CFXW parts on here from MST other than the JP1, which is a great little body. It's been carved up a little bit because This is designed around a 313 millimeter wheelbase. And one of the very first things that we learned / discovered is the longer your wheelbase, the easier four-wheel steer is to manipulate. Because every vehicle on a linked suspension has a variable wheelbase. Because when we go under compression, which is right there, the wheelbase will get, even if it's 1 millimeter, it's going to get longer. And then as it raises, you can kind of watch that rear wheel move forward a little bit. The wheelbase gets shorter. Four-wheel steer is unique in that your wheelbase is dynamic this way. Because when we're right here, the wheelbase is shorter on this side and longer on that side. And not by a little. At full lock, the wheelbase on this side is let's call it 275. And the wheelbase on the other side, this is a 300 millimeter ruler, we'll get out Victor. The wheelbase on this side is 385. So the wheelbase is effectively dynamic to the tune of about 100 millimeters. That is significant because this guy is sitting on, should be the Canyon Classic 330 wheelbase. Everybody take a shot. Because that means that when that wheelbase shortens, it's not going to shorten as significantly as it would with the wheelbase 313. The longer the wheelbase on your four-wheel steer, the better it's going to be, the more consistent it's going to be, at least from what I think that I've learned about four-wheel steer. Second to that is caster angles. On the front axle, typically, on a two-wheel steer vehicle, you want to get as much caster, as much lean back on that knuckle as you can, because that's going to give you more steer angle. It's going to allow you to turn harder. Now, that amount of caster in the front is not as important when you're four-wheel steer because the rear axles can steer as well as the fronts. So if you can only get your steer angle to here, well, these are going to help bail you out because your turning circle is going to be this bench is slightly deeper than he is wide, and he can still, well, basically 4-point turn it to get around. Rear caster angle is important in four-wheel steer because both of that dynamic wheelbase and the way that the rear end behaves relative to the front. One of the hardest things for me to learn with four-wheel steer is how to make it do. And part of that is that you should basically only be engaging four-wheel steer when you need it. And in all other instances, these two tires should be facing perfectly straight forward, which they are not. They need an adjustment to the turnbuckle or to the subtrim. They're off by about 2%, 3% on the trims. I'm running it fully manual. There are no other options. The vintage Airtronics MT4 has the absolute best four-wheel steer option that we have on the market. It is a shame it is not still made, because to go from centered full lock all the way to, there's no end. It has a detent where it's centered. So fully manual rear steer. Minimize rear caster change. Basically, you want it to wear from full extension, from full droop to full compression. You want that kingpin. You want this guy, pardon me, Luffy, you want this guy right here to move as little as possible. I have about 2 millimeters of roll, axle roll this way. So the axle moves and then the axle goes back down. We have about 2 millimeters. That is about as minimized as I've managed to get it. And that is why there are this many holes. Because he's been on a number of different tires. And when we finally got to this tire, you can see he was in that hole for a long time. And then we went to here. Because the size of the tire is going to really hit those anti-squat values, and it's going to make the rear end behave differently. Because if you've only ever driven two-wheel steer and you get into a position like this, you know what happens where when the rear traction starts to overwhelm the front, because the fronts have gotten very light and you want to start to doodle-bug. Now imagine you get into that doodle-bug position and you do this or this. Some of it might want to help and some of it might want to harm. Four-wheel steer is, in much of its application, and I don't care what anybody says to the contrary, in much of its application it is wholly counterintuitive. You get into a position where we are, say we'll start, pardon me again, Luffy, we get up right here. Now, when we steer like this, we think we know what's going to happen. I think we're going to swing this arc, like as if I was steering this way. But I don't want to swing that arc because I want to get the rear end to move more in line with the front end. And then everything's fine. And then you get into a position where you're bound or you're starting to tip. And you're like, well, what happens if I turn this way? Well, stability just went up when I turned this way. Because the wheelbase on the low side got longer. And all the wheel weight is transferred that way. So this way is going to reposition me a lot better. But this way is unstable by its nature. This is stable. So beyond, and then let me get to the other stuff. Four-wheel steer wants a tire that is asymmetrical as possible. A hieroglyphic style tire. These are vintage Losi rock claws. Ruptures, megalithics. A tire that has even the amount of directionality of a J-Concept's Tusk is going to be too much directionality. Well, why? Because typically your rear wheels can't change their attitude, and now they can. With two steering axles, it's, in my estimation, it's like starting over. You have to learn all the stuff again. Because all you can do is get yourself into trouble. And I find that overall, that four-wheel steer will get you out of trouble less often. Now, if you're trying to navigate tight passages and get through gates and stuff like that, nothing, absolutely nothing that I can think of provides as much of a performance advantage as four-wheel steer. Dig is wonderful, and it is a fantastic utility. But it can't do what four-wheel steer does. Four-wheel steer, in the right circumstance and with skills above and beyond that which I possess, four-wheel steer is as close as you can come to cheating. If someone else has a front axle that doesn't have a tremendous steer angle to it, and you have four-wheel steer on, say it's the same axles. Say he's got Mias nylons, but he's two-wheel steer, and you're Mias nylons and you're four-wheel steer, and these can execute a good angle. That is a perfectly acceptable amount of steering angle for a two-wheel steer vehicle. But your ability to do this is almost like cheating. Now, until you've put in the hours upon hours upon hours, he's probably still going to beat you because you will betray yourself at best as many times as you help yourself. Rhino V80, Holmes Revolver V2 2500 kV, because the Mias nylons are basically effectively clones of the Vanquish Portal 1.4 to 1. And then we've got a Stealth XF. We're running on 3S, so we are fairly slow. So we can absolutely get away with a 2500 in this situation. The higher the KV, the more power you're making. I mean, watch the, all we need to do is, I can't cruise control this guy, but all we need to do is go, look at the speed of the wheel. And look at it. There's a lot of gear reduction. These rock claws put off a lot of wind when they spin them too. Traxxas big bores. There are 2 vehicles in the entirety of the Canyon fleet that feature these bands, and this is one of them. There they are inside. Because we made choices. He has a tendency with that dynamic wheelbase where when you get him twisted up like this tire is still down on the surface, and this tire starts to go up. See how it wants to push down? until you steer that rear axle, and then away he goes. It has been several years. I can say with some confidence that I've gotten better at driving four-wheel steer. I cannot say that I'm particularly good at it. I've gotten better, but there are a lot of people, I guarantee a lot of people better than me. What this guy has done is taught me a great deal. It has taught me about maintaining that rear angle, about the differential. Like, I haven't tried it, I haven't built it, but to me, skid forward, so we have really short links and really long links in the back, combined with four-wheel steer, I believe that's going to be getting closer to that paradox where you've now oriented yourself in such a way that you're so focused on performance that the drivability of it will have gone down. I want a vehicle that can provide performance but is also drivable. Like, I don't have to devote all the available brain force to get the thing to do the things. So, this is a four-wheel steer that, if judged no other way, is a learning experiment. Mia's nylon axles, I think I've mentioned a couple times. 18% net underdrive to the rear, low-C rock claws, the JP1. He is fantastically fun to drive, and that, when said about something, in my experience with four-wheel steer, is just outright impressive. Because four-wheel steer, early on, can be very frustrating. Can be very frustrating. Particularly when we see the off-the-shelf four-wheel steer options. So, I don't know. What I don't know is this. What I don't know is what you need to know. What do you need to know? If there's anything that I didn't cover specific to this or four-wheel steer, if you just have a question in general, questions, comments, concerns in that section below, consider a Crawler Canyon channel membership, if you will. I'm going to put this guy into pre-position to take the thumbnail, which I do right here on the bench, just like that. I'm also going to take this opportunity to thank you so very much for watching, invite you to come back and see whatever we happen to have next. And in between now and then, please one and all do your very best to have a good one. We will see you again here from the canyon, hopefully real soon. Blue Sky High, it came from the workbench number 2. He just got some stuff done to him like a month ago, and I think he's 3 years in, maybe a little over 3 years. He's a soldier. He's working on being his best self. It doesn't matter about being the best thing in the whole fleet. That thing will change week to week. But what he's aiming for is being his best self, and we're getting closer to that all the time. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you in the next one here at the canyon.